This is a brilliant example of how to counter the most common argument against freedom of speech.
Free speech is meaningless unless you allow people you don't like to say things you don't like. Otherwise, it's irrelevant.
How to catch someone in a lie by just simply asking for examples and not ignoring it when the logic does not add up.
And if at the point at which you lose free speech, it doesn't come back.
Because the moment that you do have a singular entity who is deciding what is true, how do you get rid of the dictator? Because the dictator will never allow dissenting opinion.
I think the issue some people have is that a lot of people were brought back. I mean, some people were brought back who were previously banned for spreading things like QAnon conspiracies. You have people like Andrew Tate who were brought back, who were previously banned for things like hate speech.
Winston Churchill once said, "Democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others." This is the least bad approach to freedom of speech except for all the others.
Well, no, you are the arbiter on Twitter because you own Twitter.
Yes, I'm saying who is to say that one person's misinformation is another person's information?
And Elon is trying to say, I don't want to be the person who's policing this. Of course, the counter to that is, so you don't care? You don't accept that responsibility?
Do you think you prioritize freedom of speech over misinformation and hate speech?
When we try and claim that the guardrails we have in place are not valid or effective enough, the only solution is to have a single arbiter of truth.
Well, who's to say that something is misinformation? Who's the arbiter of that? Is it the BBC?
You're literally asking me?
Yes.
Well, no, you are the arbiter on Twitter because you own Twitter.
Yes, I'm saying who is to say that one person's misinformation is another person's information? At the point at which you say that there is this is misinformation, like who is going to decide that?
You accept that misinformation can be dangerous, that it can cause real-world harms, that it can...
Well, there's flaws to freedom of speech. There's potential to be hateful. There's potential to lie. Just because you can point out a flaw doesn't mean you should throw out the entire thing.
That it can potentially cause...
Yeah, so the point I'm trying to make is that the BBC itself has, at times, published things that are false.
So, according to your measurement, should the BBC be kicked off of Twitter or X?
Do you agree that that has occurred?
I'm quite sure the BBC have said things before that turn out to not be true.
Correct.
In its, whatever it is, 100-year history, I'm quite sure.
Yes.
And he's not quite sure how to respond to this.
Even if you aspire to be accurate, there are times when you will not be.
And he turns this around on the reporters saying, everyone makes mistakes. You as well, the BBC have made mistakes. Should you be disqualified for that?
We've spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation, and they just say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech in the company. Is that
what hate speech are you
address?
talking about? I mean, you use Twitter.
Right.
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
I mean,
just a personal anecdote. Like, what do you? I don't.
Personally, my for you, I would see I get more of that kind of content. Yeah, personally, but I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
So you see more hate speech personally?
I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
Content you don't like or hateful? What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
So what is hate speech? Does it just mean that you don't like it? Is it hate speech because it makes you feel bad? Where's the line?
Yeah, I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
No,
is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying anything.
And those that advocate for this kind of system of policing of speech will in the same breath turn around and say, I'm not saying anything, I just don't like hate speech. I just don't like misinformation. It's like, well, of course, who does like hate? Who does like lies? What's your point?
I'm
just curious. I'm trying to understand what you mean by hateful content. And I'm asking for specific examples. And you just said that if something is slightly sexist, that's hateful content. Does that mean that it should be banned?
Well, you've asked me whether my feed, whether it's got less or more. I'd say it's got slightly more.
That's why I'm asking for examples.
So this reporter is just trying to bail out of this completely because he cannot provide any specific examples here.
Can you name one example?
I honestly don't use. Honestly, I
You
don't.
can't name a single example.
I'll tell you why. Because I don't actually use that For You feed anymore. Because I just don't particularly like it.
I'm not saying this at all. Well, I'm no longer using that account.
But you
And
said
actually,
you-
a lot of people are quite similar. I only
Well,
look at
hang on a
my
second.
following.
You said you've seen
following.
more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
I'm not sure I've used that feed for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And
Well, then how did you see that hateful content?
It drives that nail home when he's like, you cannot even provide one example, and he can't.
Because I've been using Twitter since you've taken it over for the last 6 months.
Okay, so then you must have at some point seen the For You hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
And you can't give a single one.
And I'm saying
I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet.
And Elon is just not letting it go. He's just sticking to it. Stick to the truth. Follow the logic.
And yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well,
That's false.
no. What I
You
claimed,
just lied.
It is truly remarkable how he catches this reporter here who has stated that he has seen so many examples of an increase in hate speech, increase in misinformation, and yet when asked for a singular example, he cannot provide any.
No. What I claimed was there are many organisations that say that that kind of information is on the rise. Now, whether it has on my
Give me
feed
one
or
example.
not. I mean, right, and
Literally
you can
can't
look at
name
something
one.
like the Strategic Dialogue Institute in the UK. They will say that. So
Look, people will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a
Right.
single example, and you can't name one.
right, and as I've already said, I don't use that feed. But
Well, then how would you know that?
I don't think this is getting anywhere.
You literally said you experienced more hateful content, and then couldn't name a single example.
Right, and as I said,
That's absurd.
I haven't actually looked at that feed.
Then how
say,
would you
for a
know there's
few
hateful
weeks.
content?
Because I'm saying that's what I saw a few weeks ago. I can't give you an exact example. Let's move on. We only have a certain amount of time.
Wow.
COVID misinformation. You changed the
Amazing.
COVID.
What will happen is that they will bail on the conversation in one form or another. Most commonly, it's I just can't have this conversation. I just emotionally, or I'm just so, I can't handle you. You're just too brainwashed. Or it's not my job to say this. Or look, this interview is not about me. And blah, 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 blah. And they try and spin out of it. And that's exactly what we're seeing occur here.
You've changed the COVID misinformation.
Has
rules.
BBC changed its COVID misinformation?
The BBC does not set the rules on Twitter, so I'm asking you.
No, I'm talking about the BBC's misinformation about COVID.
I'm literally asking you about, you changed the labels, the COVID misinformation labels. There used to be a policy, it then disappeared. Why do that?
Someone refuses to contend with the logic, don't just look away. Don't just ignore it. Don't let it just pass you by. Stick with it.
And what about the fact that the BBC was put under pressure by the British government to change its editorial policy? Are you aware of that?
This is not an interview about the BBC.
Oh, you thought it wasn't?
I see now why you've done Twitter Spaces. I am not a representative of the BBC's editorial policy. I want to make that clear. Let's talk about something else. If you want
I'm
to talk about the
interviewing you
BBC,
too.
all right. Let's talk about something else.